Not so long ago, when people heard Vietnamese, they often thought of the boat people, refugees who left Vietnam in large numbers after the fall of Saigon in 1975. For 20 years, this was the common image: desperate people escaping hardship. But times have changed dramatically. Many former refugees have returned to seek new careers and start businesses in a transformed Vietnam. Today, Vietnam is among the fastest growing economies in Asia, with a growth rate of 6.1% over the last decade. While this growth rate does not surpass that of India and China, Vietnam has made more impressive progress in cutting poverty than both. In other words, despite not achieving the same level of economic growth, Vietnam has been more effective in addressing poverty and improving living standards for its population. Vietnam's cities are bright and bustling, while the countryside, home to about 60% of the population, is not far behind the development levels of richer Thailand. Walking around Hanoi, Vietnam's capital, you can feel boundless energy everywhere. People whiz by on scooters, buy and sell everything from phones to food in countless small shops, and rush to and fro to get to school or work. Vietnam is young, growing, and anything feels possible. It wasn't always thus. A mere 35 years ago, the country was one of the poorest in the world. When the 20-year Vietnam War ended in 1975, Vietnam's economy was among the world's weakest, and growth under the government's 5-year plans was slow. By the mid-1980s, per capita GDP was stuck between $200 and $300. Then, in 1986, the Communist Party introduced reforms called Doi Moi, or renovation, shifting from a centrally planned economy to a market-oriented one. This shift resulted in GDP per capita growing from $300 in that year to $4,000 today. When oversimplified, this story becomes a narrative of a top-down process, showing communist intelligence and bravery. It was the Communist Party of Vietnam, CPV, that lifted the people out of poverty. It was the communists who took the initiative. The real credit, though, goes to the Vietnamese people, who through their own efforts pushed the communist authorities belatedly to accept these market changes. It was the Vietnamese who lifted themselves out of poverty, mostly in spite of communist policy. Today, Vietnam's social and economic progress has made it the poster child of multilateral institutions like the World Bank. It's now a top choice for multinational companies and tourists seeking vibrant destinations. Since 2000, Vietnam's economy has been on a fast track, growing even quicker than most other Asian countries, except China and India, with an average annual growth rate of 6.2%. This growth has attracted numerous big foreign firms. Initially, it started with apparel giants like Nike and Adidas, drawn by the availability of low-skilled labour. However, the landscape has since shifted towards electronics, offering higher-value products and better-paid jobs for more skilled workers. By 2022, electronics accounted for a whopping 40% of Vietnam's exports, a significant jump from just 14% of a much smaller pie in 2010. The trade tensions between the US and China, beginning in 2018, have helped. In 2019, Vietnam produced nearly half of the $31 billion worth of American imports that moved from China to other low-cost Asian countries. On top of all that, with the increasing tensions between major powers and China's strict pandemic measures, along with rising labour costs, it's no surprise that many large companies are shifting their focus to Vietnam. Apple's biggest suppliers, like Foxconn and Pegatron, responsible for making Apple Watches, MacBooks, and more, are constructing large factories in Vietnam, poised to become the largest employers in the country. Other big names such as Dell, HP, Google, and Microsoft are also relocating parts of their production from China to Vietnam. These changes have the potential to bring even more growth and improve the lives of millions of Vietnamese people. That, in turn, could boost the popularity of the Communist Party, which has governed Vietnam as a single-party state since the war ended in 1975. Though trade and foreign investment helped Vietnam emerge from extreme poverty, can they make the country rich? The economy of Vietnam is a developing, mixed socialist-oriented market economy. It is often compared to China in the 1990s or early 2000s, and there are valid reasons for this. Both countries, under a one-party political system, shifted towards capitalism and prioritized export-driven growth. However, there are significant differences as well. While Vietnam is often labelled as export-oriented, this doesn't fully capture the extent of its foreign sales. Its goods trade surpasses a whopping 185% of its GDP. Few economies, aside from the most resource-rich nations or city-states heavily reliant on maritime trade, have ever been as trade-intensive. What sets Vietnam apart from China isn't just the volume of its exports, but also the nature of its exporters. Its strong ties to global supply chains and substantial foreign investment make it more akin to Singapore in some ways. Since 1990, Vietnam has consistently attracted significant foreign direct investment, averaging around 6% of its GDP annually, more than twice the global average and surpassing China or South Korea over a sustained period. In 2023, investors from 111 countries and territories put their money into Vietnam, with Singapore leading the pack, investing over $6.9 billion, making up 18.6% of the total FDI inflow, a rise of 5.4% year-on-year. Japan followed closely in second place with nearly $6.57 billion, while Hong Kong ranked third with $4.68 billion. Relying too much on foreign direct investment, FDI, could leave Vietnam's economy vulnerable. Sure, FDI can bring in capital, technology, and expertise, but an over-reliance on it exposes Vietnam to vulnerabilities such as sensitivity to external shocks. If there are big swings in the global economy, or if the countries investing in Vietnam change their FDI policies, it could hit Vietnam's economy pretty hard. With wages increasing in other parts of East Asia, global manufacturers found Vietnam appealing because of its low labour costs and steady exchange rate. This sparked a massive export boom, which now makes up 93% of Vietnam's GDP. Over the last decade, exports from domestic firms have gone up by 137%, while those from foreign-owned companies have shot up by 422%. But the growing difference in performance between foreign and domestic companies is becoming a problem for Vietnam's growth. The country has become overly reliant on investment and exports from foreign companies, while domestic firms have lagged behind. Another significant factor dragging down Vietnam's growth is the performance of state-owned enterprises, SOEs, which make up 1/3 of the GDP but don't grow as fast as other companies. Despite reducing the number of fully state-owned enterprises by over 90% since 2001, Vietnam still has work to do. The sector remains inefficient. To address this, targeted equitizations, sustainable divestments, and transformation programs could be implemented to make SOEs more competitive domestically and globally. Moreover, the country could tap the significant unrealized potential of its startup ecosystem. In 2019, only $741 million was invested in Vietnamese startups, while Indonesia attracted $2.38 billion. It's not shocking that Vietnam has produced just one unicorn company, compared to Indonesia's 6. By fostering a more comprehensive ecosystem, Vietnam can eliminate barriers to private entrepreneurship, making funding accessible for promising projects, and create supportive environments for high-growth businesses to flourish. There are also some underlying challenges that raise doubts about Vietnam's ability to continue expanding its manufacturing sector and attracting investments. Firstly, its labour productivity remains a concern. While there has been gradual improvement in recent years, Vietnam still lags behind some of its Asian counterparts. In 2021, Vietnam ranked 136th out of 185 countries in terms of labour productivity. One reason for this is that the relatively low labour costs that once attracted investors have increased as Vietnam has developed, and the available workforce has started to shrink. Investors are now considering alternative destinations like Cambodia, Myanmar, and Bangladesh, where labour costs are a top priority. This is having an impact on Vietnam's manufacturing sector. Even though the sector's exports and foreign investment have increased, the value kept within the country hasn't risen accordingly. In simple terms, Vietnam is producing more goods over time, but it's not increasing the share of added value captured in the country. So, despite the manufacturing sector's growing contribution to the overall economy, the value added by this sector remains flat. In fact, in 2023, it even decreased by 0.37% compared to 2022. This is partly because of a fragmented supply chain in various industries. Vietnam still relies heavily on imported goods for its exports. In recent years, investors highlight lingering concerns that can prevent them from continuing to invest, especially in high-value-added, high-tech industries, although Vietnam has done a lot to improve the ease of doing business. These concerns range from a shortage of skilled labour for research and development, or technical activities, to language efficiency, potential uncertainty relating to labour rights, and onerous applications that expatriates who want to work in Vietnam have to make. Despite its challenges, Vietnam, a country of 100 million people, maintains friendly ties with the world's biggest economies. Thanks to its strategic position next to China and a long coastline, both the US and China are keen to strengthen their relationships with Vietnam. Last year, it was the only nation to host state visits from both Xi Jinping and Joe Biden. This careful balancing act could bring significant political and economic benefits. Eager to become wealthier, Vietnam is looking to strengthen diplomatic ties with affluent countries and encourages firms from South Korea and the US to expand their production bases there. Recently, South Korea became a comprehensive strategic partner, joining a select group of Vietnam's closest allies like China and Russia. The Communist Party of Vietnam needs to boost jobs, income and exports to reach its goal of becoming a high-income nation by 2045. No easy task when its gross domestic product per capita is around $4,000, compared with $80,000 for the US. Although Vietnam is getting old before it gets rich, its demographic trends are shifting. The median age is currently only 26, yet the population is aging rapidly. Currently, 12% of the population is over 60, but this is expected to rise to 21% by 2040, one of the fastest increases globally. This trend is partly due to rising life expectancy, which has improved from 60 years in 1970 to 76 years today, thanks to better living standards. Additionally, prosperity has led to a lower fertility rate, dropping from about 7 children per woman to fewer than 2 over the same period. In the 1980s, the ruling Communist Party started to enforce a one-child policy. Although less strict than China's, it has hastened the decline. Demographic changes similar to what's happening in Vietnam are also occurring across many Asian countries, but Vietnam's situation is unique because it's still relatively poor. When countries like South Korea and Japan reached their peak share of the working-age population, their GDP per person was at $32,500 and $31,700 respectively, adjusted for purchasing power. Even China was at $9,500. But when Vietnam reached this demographic peak in 2013, the average income was only $5,000. In comparison, Indonesia and the Philippines are expected to hit this demographic milestone soon, but at much higher income levels than Vietnam experienced. As countries usually progress economically, they tend to move from farming to more productive sectors like services. Compared to its neighbours, Vietnam is a bit behind in this shift. When its working-age population was at its peak in 2013, farming still made up 18% of its economy. In comparison, when China was at a similar point, agriculture only represented 10% of its GDP. Furthermore, farming productivity often declines with age, unlike professions such as management. This heavy reliance on agriculture could be why 3/4 of Vietnamese workers are in jobs where productivity decreases as they age, compared to only half in Malaysia. Boosting productivity will help to get rich quickly, but it won't be easy. The government still strongly supports statism, and issues like corruption, censorship, environmental problems, and human rights violations remain significant concerns. Vietnam ranks poorly in international assessments of civil liberties, press freedom, and religious and ethnic minority rights. Vietnam only began to thrive after its communist leaders acknowledged that capitalism, free markets, and free trade were the best paths to wealth. Like South Korea, Taiwan, and China, Vietnam has proven that it's possible to lift a nation out of poverty under an authoritarian regime. However, it's worth noting that most of the world's richest countries are liberal democracies. Back in the late 1990s, Malaysia and Thailand were on a path similar to Vietnam's today. However, they fell into what's known as the middle income trap, a situation where countries struggle to move from being a low-cost economy to a high-value one, making it tough to compete with both low and high-income nations. As Vietnam's economy expands, wages will go up too, meaning it can't rely on its low-cost approach forever. Dependence on export-led growth would leave it vulnerable to the volatile global trading environment. In the long run, Vietnam will need to use its current growth to invest in more productive, knowledge-based sectors to reach its 2045 goal. Key services like finance, logistics, and legal services create skilled jobs and add value to existing industries. The excitement around Vietnam's business potential is warranted, but there's still a lot of work needed to turn today's promising trend into lasting prosperity.